Emma, welcome to our session today. I am so excited to have you here. I am just so naturally curious about people and why they do the things that they do. And when I met you, I was just so intrigued by your grace and your poise and just like your overall disposition. And I'm like, I need to spend more time with her. And then when we got together at the public reading of scripture, I'm just like, Emma's just so amazing. Like, I need to speak to her more. And I spend so much time talking to homeschool moms. We're in the trenches, we're doing the things, but to talk to you, a homeschooler who was like the final product, I'm like, this is a wonderful final product. I need to hear your story and your journey. So, welcome to the show. I want to give you some time to just introduce yourself and just say hi.
Thank you. Wow. So many sweet words. Yeah, it was a pleasure seeing you again when we were at the public reading of scripture. But yeah, so as you mentioned, I am, I guess, what you would say a product of homeschooling. My mother started homeschooling me and my younger brother when I was in about second grade. We had done the public school route from kindergarten into second grade, or at least I did. And we just, even way back then, I don't know, that was like at least, 15, 20 years ago, my mom saw all the faults in the public school system, the gaps in my learning, and just social issues, like starting at first and second grade. That's not really something that a parent wants to be concerned
Yeah.
with their child. So she looked into homeschooling. It was always on her heart to stay at home with us. And so she and my dad made that switch when I was about in second grade. And so that was a huge sacrifice. But at the time, it was still in that first generation of homeschooling moms, maybe a little bit towards the second, but we're still in the first because it really took off in the US in the 90s. And so my mom, she didn't have a lot of resources available to her. It was just the curriculums and the big brands that we know today were just getting started. The homeschool conferences were just starting. And so she tried to do the best that she could during that time. And so I would say probably from second grade on to fifth grade, we did just piece together certain curriculums. I know we
Yeah.
did Abeka and Seton and teaching textbooks and all those wonderful programs. And it was great. Like I look back at that time, and although I was so young, I just had such sweet memories, and it wasn't the curriculum that I am particularly fond of looking back now, but it was the time with my brother and my mom and my dad, and we got to go to the zoo and museums during the day, and we got to go on family trips when other kids were in school, and so we didn't have long lines and crowds, and so all those memories I look back on and I'm just like, wow, like how special was that to do during that time. But yeah, my mom, I just remember her every single morning being very disciplined, waking us up, and we started the day with reading about a saint or doing our devotion, reading a little bit of the Bible before we started our day of learning, which wasn't a long day like most people are used to, but it's just enough time that a kid needs 3, maybe 4 hours max a day. And it was just a wonderful structure. I'm so grateful for her diligence and her discipline. And I think that's what the hardest thing was about homeschooling during that time, for her at least, was not only the lack of a holistic curriculum, but just the fact that there wasn't a particular time structure or guide in which she could follow. So she kind of had to just be really disciplined herself. And so, yeah, very grateful for her doing that for us. And then it was around middle school where we had to move. Me and my family, we moved to a different state, and we were put into a parochial school. And it was at that time where it was really telling how much is lacking in our public and even some private institutions. I hate to say, both in the aspect of, learning about and respecting Christianity, and just making sure that the kid and family is at the focus of education. All that seemed to go to the wayside. And so that year was a bit of, I just say like the missing year in my education, because we did that, and we did that due to certain circumstances at the time. But quickly my mom realized, okay, I think we need to, fix our family unit, help my kids. And so she went back to the drawing board for homeschooling. And that's when she found classical conversations. And so we made another move, and that's when we officially started CC. And it was really important for my mom to, after going through, many years of trying to figure out the best way to homeschool us, was that she wanted us to be a part of a classical education. It was important for us to have Christ at the center of our education. That was always in my family's practice and belief. And so it wasn't that aspect that was particularly drawing about the curriculum, but what my mom wanted was for us to be a part of the three distinct arts that makes classical education very different. And that is, sticking to the grammar and the dialectic and the rhetoric, the trivium essentially of education. And so when she found that, it was like everything clicked, like everything we had learned previously just fit into the right form and the right place. And then we had a community that was doing the same thing as well. And so that was very important for us. And yeah, I ended up graduating through that curriculum, and each year got more and more hands-on and experiential. The last year of the program, we all had to write a thesis, and then we had to defend it. And that's something that kids don't usually do until they get into college. So doing that in the high school years was challenging, but I think it was important because in college, I was able to expand on my thesis. I was able to have a set form already in my vocabulary and my experience that I could draw back on. And so I needed very minimal coaching during that part of acquiring my bachelor degree. So that was a great. And yeah, like I said before, like I could talk for hours about classical education and how I think that it's important for kids to be educated in that way. But it's really the memories with my family and the experience that I got to have that I look back on with such fondness, and just the ability to pursue my hobbies and be a part of so many different, clubs and activities, and not have to worry about the worldliness that comes with being in a public institution. And so, so I look back at that time with gratitude. But that was my homeschooling experience. And soon I will be able to be a parent teaching my own daughter, but I have a few years to collect my thoughts and get ready for a whole new challenge. So, yeah.
Emma, your reflection was so beautiful, and it was also very encouraging, and I have so much to say about it. So one, I'll start off by saying that your mom is such a pioneer, and she's so amazing in terms of her discipline and really just putting all the things together. Like, she's an eclectic homeschooler, and that's where I find myself. I'm using classical conversations as my framework, but then I'm pulling from other different pieces, whether it's to supplement or whether it's to do the math piece or the language piece. And to hear that your mom was doing this years ago, it's so reassuring to know that one, it can be done, because look at what we have today. Like, you're such an amazing blueprint, right? But some of the things that you talked about really just reassured me when you said, we had times to go to field trips, we had time to spend time together, we had memories in terms of reading the Bible and prioritizing what's important. And for me, the reason that's reassuring is because sometimes I focus on what's not important, like the clean house, or did you do this, the chores. And while character building is important, and the domestic things and all the things that come together when you're doing life with your family, while those are important, that's not what you remembered. You don't remember that your room was clean. You didn't remember that your mom cooked a certain meal. You didn't remember that you had to get up at a certain time to go to school. What you remembered were the beautiful memories that were formed as a result of your parents making this decision to do home-centered education. So that's really
Absolutely.
reassuring.
Yeah, you remember the love, the fact
Mm,
that your parents invested time in you. That's what you remember. It's just, yeah, just look back and just think love. Okay, if I don't, I remember there was times where, yeah, we had tons of domestic issues and chores and things that are a part of learning, which is
yeah.
great. It's the fact that somebody sacrificed something for you. Um,
Mm.
I think that's also very synonymous with Christianity,
Ooh.
um, but yeah, but I think that's what I remember most. What your kids will remember too.
Thank you. And I love that comparison of, the sacrifice and invest in time and how we're modeling Christianity for our children through the decisions that we make, right? So it's one thing to say, love your brother, love your sister, love your parents. But when you're modeling it and showing it, then the kids understand that experientially. So I think that's beautiful.
Right.
Another thing you talked about was a social piece. I remember so many people saying to me when I decided to homeschool, well, what about the social piece? And I'm like, what about it? Or, yeah, you're right. I am doing this for the social piece, what I don't want, right? So I'd love to hear your experience if you can remember one, the social aspect pre second grade when you were in school, and then the social aspect as a homeschooler, then going back in for that little stint and then going back through the community through CC. So if you can kind of piece that together, what was it like for socialization?
Yeah, I always like this question because I don't know why the stigma is still that homeschoolers are weird. I think that that's going away a little bit. I don't know why that's always the first generalization, but it helped that I'm a more extroverted personality. My brother is a more introverted personality. So my parents got to see both ranges of socialization outside of public school. I would say our first telling of why homeschoolers aren't antisocial would be the fact. So my parents were in ministry, and me and my brother, we socialized with each other and our parents, but we socialized with a lot of older people. We were going to like nursing homes a lot of old people in our congregation. I would say for like our elementary years, or grammar years, if you will, we were socializing with a very diverse range of people, in age and, in culture and ethnicity. And so I think that's something very different than the average public schooler who's put in a class of like 20 to 40 kids, their same age. Lots of schools, depending on your zone or if you're a private, you don't really have the diversity that you may think you would have. And so I think that my brother and I got that firsthand, really young. In addition, we also pursued like our interests. So like I was in dance and theater, and my brother was in sports. And so we really like touched on all different walks of life and all different, kids and families and, older people, younger people. And so that's how we were socialized, in the very beginning, I would say. Yeah. And then as we got older, you make your own circles and you find your own community and you kind of stick with that. And that's pretty much what happens to everyone as they mature. But yeah, I just remember, people always telling me and my brother, wow, you're so articulate for your age. And we just thought, like, that's so weird. Like, why wouldn't we be articulate when we're speaking to adults? And it's because we had practice, listening to adults and speaking with them and having a conversation. And so I think that's really important. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, and it was two like YouTube influencers. And I bring this up because this is like my generation now, because everything's online and everybody's famous, I guess. but it was like, a couple interviewing another couple. One was public schooled, one was homeschooled. And the public schoolers were like, wow, you guys just seem way cooler than we are. And you were homeschooled. And they're like, what do you mean way cooler? And they're like, wow, you just know the right words to say. And the homeschoolers were like, it's not that we know the right words to say. We just are able to contextualize things. We're able to, process conversation differently because we have been classically trained. And we never thought of ourselves as like cool or uncool. We just lived, and like living outside of societal norms and different, different like cliques and clubs, like being able to experience a wide range of the world is really important. I think it's what makes socialized people, who they are. And yeah. And so it was very interesting to listen to, because I'm like, wow, even now, like there seems to be this like shift between who are the social and the unsocial people. And another thing I like to point out is that kids will have social trouble no matter if they're in public school or out of it. There's so many unsocialized kids in public school and socialized kids in public school. So it's like, I'm like, if you meet a socially awkward person, they may or may not be homeschooled, but it doesn't really matter because there's not a stat on it anymore. But I tend to think that homeschoolers are more articulate and able to communicate with a wider audience, just from experience. Yeah.
And I appreciate you for dispelling that myth, because I know that there's some people, I've spoken to people personally where they're like, I love classical conversations, or I love this curriculum, or I love the idea of homeschooling, and I love the benefits and the flexibility, but I don't know if I can do it because of the socialization. So I just know that someone listening to what you just shared would really be able to go on the other side of the fence saying, that stigma, that myth, we just really need to dispel it and move on, because pretty much you're saying that your children being home with you is a bad thing, right? And I don't believe that. There's so many things that you echoed that my children have said, and they're 7 and 9, right? I remember the 9-year-old Hadar saying to me, Mommy, I feel so bad for public school kids. They have to wake up so early and they have so much homework. And then when do they have time to do sports and play and all this stuff? And then they have to go to bed so late because, they're trying to get all this stuff done. And I'm like, Kadar, I'm sure the public school kids are just fine and they're fine with their life. But I appreciated the comment because it reassured me that what we're doing was making an impact. Even when you talked about like the field trips and the experiential learning, that's what I did, because I remember being in college learning history on the black and white textbook, and it was so boring. You memorize the facts, you memorize the data just to pass the test, and then probably a week later, you forgot everything because you just crammed it. Whereas
Sure.
for us, we were learning about George Washington, and I said, come on, kids, we're going to Pennsylvania. And we drove over to George Washington's Crossing. They saw the exact boat that he was in as he, went for his defeat, and they saw what life looked like, how people dressed. And imagine learning history in that way, where you're recreating the experience and you're reliving the experience, versus in 1789, George Washington was granted the full powers. Like instead of just trying to memorize content and not experiencing it, it's such a more powerful way. Even something as simple as an apple, instead of showing a picture of an apple and showing the color and showing the core and the stem and the leaf, bring an actual apple to the class, right? So you just highlighted so many things that I'm trying to do in my life with the kids. And I appreciate that you're sharing the benefits of it.
Yeah. And I'm sure your kids like talked with a docent when you guys went, or,
Yes.
someone who worked there, and they had a conversation or were excited about showing the kids. And like,
Mhm.
that's what I'm talking about like, socialization. Cause I think like people think that in public school, going to school, being in a class with the same 20 to 40 people every single day, every single week for a year is social. And yeah, technically it is social, but imagine going to one co-op, or
Yeah.
one community like once a day, or once a week, or 2 to 3 times a week with the same
Mhm.
people. Okay, yeah, you see those same people that many, days a week, but then you get to go home and spend time with your family and
Yeah.
learn from them, which are arguably way better people anyways. And then you can go to your sport or your
Yeah,
hobby and meet those people. And it's like, it's so much more.
it is. And the funny thing is, I've heard my friends who are teachers say, and these kids come to school and they want to talk in the class. We're not here to socialize. And I'm like, so where did this stigma come from? Where did this myth come
That's
from?
true. I
Because
totally
public school is
forgot.
saying you're not here for that.
Yep, you're right. And they do say that. That's crazy. That's a good
Yeah.
point. I forgot about that.
So it's
Yeah,
so funny that, we create these stigmas and these narratives and just these stories. We just make things up. And we need to really empower people to make choices that serve them without them being afraid of, all these stories that we made up.
absolutely.
So let's pivot a little. You started talking about classical conversations and a classical education. I didn't know about a classical education until I started this homeschool journey. I always
Mhm.
said, I'd really love for my kids to know the classics and these great authors and the history and all that stuff, not realizing there was an actual curriculum built around it. So, in
Right.
your experience, both as a homeschooler and in the work that you've done, how would you define or explain a classical education? And then tell me more about how CC fulfills that.
Yeah. So a classical education just recognizes that you learn anything by using the trivium,
Yes.
which is the grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And so that's like the basis of a classical education. I like to explain it as we don't learn in silos
Mm,
as human beings. We've been forced into learning that way. Like here is math, here is science, here is English.
yeah.
But when you think about the classics, and when you say the classics, you think of, literature like, Homer and Shakespeare and, Jane Austen.
Yeah.
You think of those classics, and what makes those stand out is that they're very, holistic
Hmm.
work. They touch on a lot of different themes. They touch on a lot of different components of life. And that's what classical education seeks to do, is to show and learn um, through all of the different spheres of life. So when you're doing math, it's not just numbers and right and
Yeah.
wrong answers. Math is in science, math is in art, it's outside in nature.
Hmm.
So that's just like one example of the integration. And then you're not able to comprehend anything in math without words.
Right.
And you're not able to understand what the words mean unless you have context, unless you can compare the words. And then, how would you teach someone else? You need to explain it. So, like,
Yeah.
essentially, what I just described is the trivium. You just go through the grammar, which is, what is this? The dialectic,
Hmm.
how does this compare to something else, and understanding what are the rules behind these words or problems or literature. And then the rhetoric, what is the fruit that comes from it?
Hmm.
What is the explanation? What is the catharsis? What is
Right.
the expression? And so yeah, so that's classical education in a nutshell. And something that you like pointed on earlier about my mom, piecing together so many different curriculum and so many different things when we were younger, is, that's what she was missing, because she knew that all these things go together. And that's why she was
Yeah.
so diligent about every day having the routine, having this subject come after this subject because it will tie in. And she was
Right.
already naturally doing that integration. But it's hard when different people have different understandings and way of explaining things. And
Yeah.
so that's where the classical conversations curriculum really just, turned all the lights on. Um,
Hmm.
my mom is that it's all intertwined. It's all together. You're not going to learn in a silo. You're gonna learn in more of like a wheel in a
Yes.
circle. And at the center is God. And so that was really important to her and to our family. Um, yeah. And then, the classical arts comes back if you want to pursue higher education.
Right.
Um, and you have to use those tools in your workplace. You have
Hmm.
to use it even after you're done in a formal educating institution. Um, and so, yeah, so it's just a very, I think, important and integral way to learn.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, if
Yeah.
you have any more questions about that, I could just keep going.
No, you're great. And what I love what you talked about was the silos, because I realized that sometimes we try to compartmentalize things like, no, 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 we're not talking about that right now. We're doing math. We're not talking about that right
Or
now. Not realizing that we're preparing our children for the real world. So even when we take them to the bank or we take them to the library and we say, hey, go over to the library and ask them to check out this book, we're preparing them to use their manners and to ask questions and to complete transactions, right? So
right,
even with classical conversations and just learning in this integrated way, that's how I'm really trying to approach class. I can be very guilty of being the worksheet queen. And the reason for that is you want to see tangibly that the knowledge has taken place, but it's not
or
always something that you can measure, right?
right,
That's the thing. We're always trying to measure and test so that we can see if something happened, but we can find that out orally or just through interaction. So I'm trying to bring math into the kitchen. Like, okay, guys, here's pizza. How many slices does each person get if we divide it in half? How many slices does each person get if we divide it, right? So bringing math into baking and showing them, okay, so the recipe says 1 cup. If we want to make X amount or half amount or a third, what do we do? Now we're talking about fractions, really bringing that into real world problems. That's how I explain math to them. I'm like, math is not just a bunch of numbers. Math involves real world. So you go to the store and you have $20, but the item costs $17. How much money do you have left? Right?
right.
Those are the conversations that we're having. And I remember like sometimes we'll go to the store, my kids will say to me, Mommy, can I have a budget? And most times I'll say no. But sometimes I'm like, okay, you get $5, you get $5. And they're like, let's put our money together. We have $10, we can buy this, you know? So just
Uh-huh.
really seeing that explode. And then going back to the classical conversation piece, what I love is, like I mentioned before, it's the integration. But when you talked about the trivium, I really appreciated that because there's certain things that I have to understand in that way. Like if you
Mhm.
come to me and you're talking to me about a concept that I don't know, like cars or the mechanic or something, I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Wait, what is the engine? What is this? Right? Like I need
Yeah.
to know the grammar first. I need to know, okay, so this word means that. Okay, great. And then once you get to the next space, it's like, so this does that. So if I hear this sound, then potentially it's this part of the car, right? And then finally I can say, now I can debate with you. I'm like, no, 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 that has to be the engine. That's the carburetor. No, no, it's the window, it's the brake. Now that I've learned all these things because it's on the bookshelf of my brain, I can pull it down. But
Mhm.
before, when you just try to dump so much information on a kid where they don't even have the basics, or we're not using the greatness of their brain, which is a sponge at this young age, to soak up all the information and then build on it, I think we do them a disservice. So that's one of the reasons I love CC.
Yeah. And what you just mentioned, it's like arguably there is only one way to learn, and that's the classical model. Because, like you said, you can't have a conversation, about your car and what needs to be, repaired and fixed unless you know the different parts and
Yeah, the
you're
grammar.
able to have a conversation. Your kids, they're not able to ask you for a budget unless they know what money is, what
Right.
numbers are, what is a budget, will I get this again?
Right.
There's so many, I think that just people don't realize,
Yeah.
that we're learning in that way. And once you realize it, you can really expand on it. See, that's the thing.
Hmm.
I feel like everyone learns this way, but because they don't realize it, they're not able to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And I think that's what CC helps with, is being able to do that in community with people who are like, all right, we are going to go through this trivium and stop. We're not going to, compare these words until we really, come to some sort of
Right.
definition here. And so, and yeah, so that's what I appreciate about the curriculum for sure.
Yeah. Another selling point for me was when I saw everything in one book. I'm like, wait, so all these subjects are in this book? You mean I don't need 10 books because I'm doing history, geography, the timeline, Latin? That's amazing. And everything is on this one page for this one week. That was such a huge selling point for me because it showed not just the integration, but how beautifully it was thought out and streamlined so that they could make it to a point where it's not overwhelming. Because a lot of people just hearing the word classical, hearing classical education, it can be intimidating. But then
Right.
once I saw the content, I was like, wow, they really put a lot of work into this. One book, one page, I'm sold. And then the other piece about making it Christ-centered, a lot of people will say, okay, so we're going to do Bible and then we're going to have school. And I'm like, well, God is the center of everything. So as you're doing math, God is a God of order. Talk about the order in that. As you're doing science, well, he created the mountains, he created the trees, he created everything. So instead of, like you said earlier, making things in a silo where it's like, now we talk about geography without bringing in the creator of the creation, like it's a missed opportunity.
Yes. Yep. I agree.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Do you have any final thoughts? Like I could talk to you all day about all things homeschool, classical education, classical conversations, but do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think my final thought is just that I appreciate, and I don't want to just be a walking ad for CC. I want to be
Why not?
a walking ad. Yeah, I mean, I guess, why not? Truly, I want to, not just be a walking ad for classical education, but for home-centered education.
Yeah.
That's what's important to me. That's what I think is going to change the world is parents making the decision to educate their children.
Mhm.
So however that works out for the family, I hope that they find a classical education helpful to them. Whether they do CC or not, I think that kids will remember being loved by their parents. They'll remember their family. They'll strengthen that bond. And that's how we create world changers and,
Mm.
people to really influence the world for better. And so, yeah. And so that's my final thought. It just, any family who chooses to do that, I think is a rock star. And,
Aw,
uh, in my eyes, at least, because it's
I
hard.
love it. That is so affirming. And of course, I have a final thought in your final thought. Because as you were talking, it just really helps me to remember why we're doing what we're doing. Because when I first started it, I thought, okay, so let me get the desk ready, let me get all the things ready because we're just going to do school at home, right? No, it's not homeschool, it's home-centered education. So no, you're not just moving the desk from the public school to the house or to the home. What you're doing is creating a new structure. So it's really about leaning into the flexibility and prioritizing, putting first things first, putting God in the center and making it home-centered learning. So like you said earlier with the chores, when they are doing making their bed or doing whatever they're doing, that is a part of learning. Learning did not stop because they're doing a chore. Learning did
Yep.
not stop because we have to take a trip to the bank or the supermarket. That is a part of learning. And that's why a lot of adults are not prepared for the real world because it was school, 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 worksheet, worksheet, worksheet. Okay, go and thrive. And you're like, wait, what? You're going to let me out by myself? Like, I don't know how to do this. But we're teaching them, we're bringing them alongside us, and we're modeling it, and we're really showing them that learning does not happen in a silo. So,
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Like, yeah, that's another thing that I forget that people say is when we use the term homeschool, we think about bringing the school at home, but
yeah,
we don't want to bring the school at home. The whole reason why we got out of the school was to be different.
right,
And so that's why there was like this movement in the 90s of like unlearning.
right.
It's like trying to completely deconstruct what was going on in the school. But yeah, another thing that I just wanted to bring it up before I forgot about like the testing and like the cram to dump to forget repeat
Yeah.
model. Like it never really used to be that way. Like classical
Mm,
education has been around for centuries, for eons, like Socrates. Like this
right.
is what, education was always to people. And like Columbia, 40 years ago, I think it was only, as recent as the 80s, maybe, but they did blue books with all of their graduates. So instead of like, your little, I don't know, your fill in the blank tests, memorize, dump, never learn. They had what, we do in classical conversations, which is the blue books, like given a prompt, write everything you know.
Yeah.
This isn't a, right or wrong type answer. We just want to see what is going on inside here.
Right.
And yeah, I was like, okay, so our most prestigious universities did this decades ago, and we're not doing it anymore. Where have we gone wrong? And it's because we have the school mindset. And so, yeah, that's just another good point that I forget. See, I forget people say all these things because
Yeah.
now I'm in the homeschool community that I'm not as like rattled anymore. But
Right.
yeah, but that's true.
Yeah. So tell us really quickly as we close out, what does your day look like? Where are you working right now? And why did you decide to work
Sure. Yeah. So right now I work for Classical Conversations. I work for the founder of CC, Lee Bortons. I'm kind of a project manager slash personal assistant. So I get to see kind of the business from her perspective, which I prefer because it's all very visionary.
there?
It's less of the managerial things, which are very important. I
Yeah,
would
of
love
course.
to be involved in that one day, but being a part of the vision casting is really energizing. And so every day I feel very motivated to work and to serve her in this capacity. And then I also am a consultant for a Christian nonprofit in New York, and they're responsible for producing audio drama Bibles and supporting other nonprofits in well, not just in the city but globally. And
Hmm.
so I help them expand into family and education sectors with sharing scripture. And so specifically the public reading of scripture, the practice of it. And so I get to do that part-time, and that's, equally as fulfilling. But yeah, so my day, some days are busier than most,
Hmm.
and I'm traveling a lot, but I'm hoping that will slow down soon because I am about to have my first. So I will need to take a break from all of that for a little bit.
Congratulations. I missed it when you said it earlier. I'm like, maybe she's just saying, hypothetically or in the future. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting. We have, just, well, less than halfway to go now. So
Oh, wow.
I'm getting
Congrats.
anxious.
That's so awesome. And then, yes, we'll definitely have to do more interviews and recordings to hear the other side of it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Hit me up in probably 4 years.
Right.
I'll have a whole new story.
A
I'll
whole
just
new
be like, oh my
perspective.
gosh, I don't know if I can go on. You'll have to
And
talk
then
me
I'm just
down.
going to play this back to you. Like, do you
Yeah.
remember the beauty of it? Do you remember why you're doing this?
Right. You remember what, she might say in 20 years, or you hope she says, but God willing.
Right. Emma, you are a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for your time today. I am so excited that we got time to connect, and I look forward to our upcoming recordings.
Yes. Thank you so much. Such a privilege.
My pleasure.